April 28th, 1945. Bavaria, Germany. The smell of smoke still burned my nostrils. It wasn't the smoke from bread baking in the stone oven. It was something else. Charred wood, melted rubber, the acrid stench of defeat. My name is Greta Hoffmann. I'm 32 years old, hands calloused from milking cows since I was 14, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed we were winning the war. The radio says our soldiers are retreating strategically, I wrote in my diary on March 14th. Papa says it's lies, but I still want to believe. If this story is already gripping you, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever heard a World War II story from this perspective? Let's keep these untold histories alive. Now, back to April 1945. My farm sat 5 miles from Dachau. Yes, that Dachau. But I swear on my mother's memory, we didn't know. Or rather, we knew there was a camp. We knew prisoners worked in the factories. But the rest? The chambers? The stacks of bodies? I didn't know. Didn't want to know. The Wehrmacht marched past our road on April 18th, heading east. They weren't the same proud soldiers who'd paraded through Munich in 1940. These men limped. Their uniforms hung loose. Boys, really. 16, maybe 17, with eyes that had already seen too much. One stopped at our well, drank deeply, then looked at me with something between pity and accusation. "Hide your daughters, Frau," he said. "The Amis are coming." The Americans. I had 2 daughters. Ilse was 9, blonde braids always coming undone. Anna was 6, gap-toothed and curious about everything. My husband, Friedrich, had fallen at Stalingrad in January 1943. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I made sauerbraten, and I burned it that night standing at the stove, the paper crumpled in my fist. For 2 years, it had been just us 3 women and Papa. My father, 71, bent from decades of farming but stubborn as spring frost. When the soldier warned us about the Americans, Papa spat into the dirt. "Let them come." He growled. What more can they take? Everything, as it turned out. April 29th, 1945, 6:47 a.m. The rumble woke me before dawn. At first, I thought it was thunder. We'd had storms all week, the kind that turned the fields into soup. But this was different. Rhythmic, mechanical, growing louder. Tanks. I grabbed the girls from their bed. They slept together now, for warmth and comfort, and we stumbled downstairs. Papa was already at the window, peering through a gap in the shutters we'd nailed closed 3 days earlier. "How many?" I whispered. "Enough." The first Sherman rolled into view at 7:02 a.m. I checked the clock, an old cuckoo clock my grandmother brought from Nuremberg, because I needed something normal to hold on to. The tank was massive, olive green, with a white star painted on its side. Mud caked its treads. Behind it came trucks, jeeps, soldiers on foot, rifles ready. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ilse grabbed my hand. "Mama, are they going to kill us?" "No, Liebling. No." I pulled her close, feeling her heartbeat through her thin nightgown. "We're just farmers. They have no reason." The knock came hard and fast. 3 brutal pounds that rattled the doorframe. Papa looked at me. I looked at the girls. For a moment, we were frozen, a tableau of terror in our own kitchen, surrounded by the mundane. A bowl of watery porridge, 3 chipped cups, the smell of ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Another knock. Louder. "Aufmachen!" a voice shouted. Then, in broken German, "Open! Now!" Papa shuffled to the door. His hands shook as he lifted the iron bar. The door swung inward and 3 American soldiers stepped inside. The first thing that struck me wasn't their uniforms or their weapons. It was their skin. All 3 were black. I had never seen a black person before. Not in person. Only in the propaganda films they'd shown us in the village square. Caricatures, monsters, warnings about what would happen if we lost the war. Untermensch, they called them. Subhuman. But these men weren't monsters. The one in front was tall, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders and eyes that scanned our kitchen with professional efficiency. He couldn't have been older than 25. His helmet bore the insignia of the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, though I wouldn't learn that name until later. "Anyone else here?" he asked in English. I understood enough. 4 years of war had taught me basic English. Useful for when the Red Cross packages arrived. Back when packages still arrived. "No," I managed. "Just us. My father. My daughters." The soldier's eyes softened slightly when he saw the girls. Ilsa had pressed herself against my side, but Anna, brave, foolish Anna, stared at him with undisguised fascination. "Clear," he called over his shoulder. Then to me, "You have food? Weapons?" "No weapons," Papa said quickly. Too quickly. The Wehrmacht took everything. 2 rifles, a hunting pistol. Months ago. It was true. They'd swept through in February, requisitioning anything that could fire a bullet. We'd hidden some potatoes in the root cellar, buried a sack of flour under the chicken coop. But weapons? We had kitchen knives. A rusted scythe in the barn. The soldier nodded slowly. He didn't believe us. I could see it in his eyes. But he also didn't care. He looked exhausted. They all did. Their uniforms were caked with dirt that might have been from France or Belgium or any of the 100 miles between here and wherever they'd started. "We're going to search," he said. Not asking permission. Stating fact. "Don't run. Don't hide anything. Make this easy, it goes easy." What choice did we have? 2 soldiers moved through our house like ghosts. I heard their boots on the stairs, the creak of floorboards in the bedroom I'd shared with Friedrich. Drawers opening, closet doors, the scrape of furniture being moved. The tall soldier stayed with us in the kitchen. He'd lowered his rifle slightly but kept it ready. His eyes never stopped moving. Window to door, Papa to me, checking angles. Professional, wary. Anna took a step forward. "Anna." "No." I reached for her, but she was already speaking. "Are you a real American?" she asked in German. The soldier blinked. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less dangerous. "Yeah, kid," he said in English. "Real as they come. My papa said Americans were bad," Anna continued, oblivious to my mortification. "But you don't look bad." I wanted to sink through the floor. Here we were, at the mercy of these men, and my 6-year-old was interrogating them about propaganda, but the soldier just crouched down, bringing himself to Anna's eye level. He set his rifle against the wall, still within reach, but the gesture was deliberate, gentle. "Your papa was wrong, kid," he said softly. Then, in halting German, "Ich bin gut." "I am good." Anna giggled. His accent was atrocious. The other soldiers returned. "Clear," one reported. "Found some hidden potatoes in the cellar. Flour under the chickens. No weapons. No radios. Let them keep the food," the tall soldier said. I stared at him. "Let us keep our food? After everything they'd taken, every city burned, every soldier killed, they were letting us keep potatoes?" He caught my expression and shrugged. "Orders are, don't starve the civilians. We're not here to make war on farmers." But hadn't we made war on them? Hadn't our country invaded Poland, France, Russia? Hadn't Friedrich died trying to starve Leningrad? The contradiction made my head spin. The soldiers left, just like that. No violence, no looting. They took nothing except a quick inventory and left us standing in our kitchen, hearts still racing, trying to process what had just happened. "They were," Ilsa started, then stopped. "They were nice, Mama," Papa grunted. "Don't trust them. Americans are playing a long game. They'll come back." He was right about that, at least. May the 1st, 1945. Afternoon. They came back on the 3rd day. Same soldiers, same tired eyes. But this time, the tall one. I'd learned his name was Corporal James Washington, from somewhere called Georgia. Carried something unexpected. A crate. He set it on our kitchen table with a heavy thunk, then stepped back, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "For you," he said in his broken German. "For dich." I approached cautiously. The crate was U.S. Army issue, stenciled with codes I couldn't read. Inside, canned meat. Real meat. Not the sawdust sausages we'd been choking down for years. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, powdered milk, white bread wrapped in wax paper, coffee, real coffee. I stared at it like it was a hallucination. "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. Corporal Washington shrugged. "We got rations. More than we need. You got kids." He nodded toward Ilsa and Anna, who were peeking around the doorframe. "Kids shouldn't starve. War's not their fault, but it was my fault, wasn't it? I'd voted for the party in 1933. I'd cheered when they annexed Austria. I'd waved a flag when the Wehrmacht marched into Prague. I'd believed, God help me, I'd believed that we were making Germany great again. And now this black soldier, whose people my government had called subhuman, was giving my children chocolate. The shame hit me like a fist to the stomach. I can't," I started, pushing the crate away. "We don't deserve—" "Hey," Washington's voice was firm but not unkind. "This ain't about deserve. This is about hungry kids." He switched to English, speaking to one of his companions. "Tell her, Davis." The other soldier, Davis, shorter, stockier, with a scar above his left eye, stepped forward. His German was better. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we know what happened here. We liberated Dachau 2 days ago." His voice dropped. "We saw. My blood turned to ice. We know what your government did. What they built 5 miles from your farm." He paused, letting that sink in. "But Corporal Washington, he says you got kids. Says you're just farmers. Says we don't punish children for their parents' sins. Even though," Washington added quietly in English, but I understood, "they sure as hell punished us for ours." I didn't understand that comment until much later, until I learned about Jim Crow, about segregation, about how these men had fought for a country that treated them as second-class citizens, how they'd liberated camps while their own families back home couldn't eat at the same lunch counters as white folks. But in that moment, I just stared at the crate of food. "Thank you," I whispered. Papa, watching from his chair, said nothing. May 3rd, 1945. They kept coming back. Not every day. They were busy processing prisoners, securing the area, preparing for whatever came next. But every few days, Corporal Washington or Private Davis or one of the others from the 761st would stop by. Sometimes they brought food. Sometimes they just checked on us, made sure no one was harassing us, that the Wehrmacht stragglers weren't forcing us to hide them. One afternoon, Washington arrived with a medical kit. Anna had cut her foot on a piece of broken glass. We'd swept up after a storm shattered our kitchen window, but missed a shard. It wasn't serious. But in May 1945 in rural Bavaria, even small cuts could turn deadly. No medicine, no bandages, no doctors. They'd all been conscripted or fled. Washington cleaned the wound with water he'd boiled himself, applied sulfa powder from his kit, wrapped it in clean gauze. "Keep it dry," he instructed. "Change the bandage every day. You got any more gauze?" I shook my head. He left the entire medical kit. "Orders say we're supposed to turn these in," he said with a wry smile. "Guess I'll forget, for a week or two." That night, I wrote in my diary, "I don't understand these men. Everything we were told was a lie. They are not animals. They are not monsters. They are kinder to us than our own soldiers were in the end." May 8th, 1945, the day the war ended. We heard about the surrender on a radio we'd hidden in the barn. Another crime, possession of a radio, but everyone had one by then. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. Germany had unconditionally surrendered. The war was over. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the static-filled announcement, and felt nothing. Not relief, not joy, not even sadness, just emptiness. Friedrich was still dead. Our cities were still rubble. My country was still responsible for horrors I couldn't comprehend. The knock came an hour later. Washington and Davis, but this time with 2 more soldiers, and a truck, moving out. Washington said simply, "Heading south. Munich." I nodded. Of course, the war was over. They had no reason to stay. Wanted to drop this off first. He gestured to the truck. "Consider it a goodbye present." They unloaded sacks of flour, canned goods, seeds, actual vegetable seeds, American varieties I'd never seen. A hand-crank water pump to replace the one the Wehrmacht had stripped for parts. Blankets, soap. It was more than we'd seen in 3 years of total war. "Why?" I asked again. After everything, after Dachau, after the camps, after all of it, why help us? Washington was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the farm, at the broken fence I hadn't had time to repair, at the thin chickens scratching in the dirt, at my daughters watching from the window. "You know what my grandmother told me before I shipped out?" he finally said. "She said, 'James, you remember, hurt people, but healed people heal people.' She said if I came back from this war with more hate than I left with, then Hitler won, even if we beat him." He met my eyes. "I ain't letting Hitler win." Davis added something in English, and Washington translated. "He says we've all got to live on this planet together when the shooting stops. Might as well start figuring out how." They left that afternoon. I watched the convoy disappear down the dirt road, heading toward a future none of us could imagine. Papa, standing beside me, finally spoke. "They shamed us. Not with cruelty, with kindness." He was right. May 15th, 1945. The full weight of what had happened 5 miles from my farm began to sink in as survivors were processed, as newspapers, American newspapers, started circulating. Photos, testimonies, numbers. 11 million dead in the camps, 6 million Jews, 5 million others, Romani, disabled, political prisoners, Soviet POWs. 5 miles from where I baked bread and tucked my daughters into bed. I had 2 choices. I could pretend I didn't know, claim ignorance, insist I was just a farmer, just trying to survive, or I could face what we'd allowed to happen. The men who'd shared their rations with my hungry children, men my government had declared subhuman, had shown me what humanity looked like. The least I could do was try to learn from them. I planted the American seeds that week. Tomatoes, squash, something called green beans. They grew slowly in the depleted German soil, but they grew. Some things I learned could be rebuilt, but first, you had to admit they'd been broken. 1 week later, I received a letter. It had been left at the village postal station, still barely functioning, with my name on it. Inside, in careful handwriting, "Frau Hoffmann, we are moving to new positions, but I wanted to write. Thank you for letting us see that not all Germans were the enemy, that some were just people caught in the machine. When you tell your daughters about the war, tell them this. Kindness is a choice. Hate is easy. Kindness takes courage. We all have to choose, every day, which world we want to build. Stay safe. Keep those girls safe. Corporal James Washington, 761st Tank Battalion." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my diary. Years later, when Ilsa and Anna were old enough to ask the hard questions, "Mama, what did you do during the war? Did you know? Why didn't you stop it?" I showed them that letter. I told them about the black soldiers who shared their food when they had every reason to let us starve. I told them about Corporal Washington's grandmother and her wisdom. Healed people heal people. I told them that shame and guilt are different from responsibility, that you can't change the past, but you can choose what you do with the future. But that comes later. On May 15th, 1945, I stood in my kitchen, reading that letter for the 5th time. And for the first time since Friedrich's death, I cried. Not from sadness, from something more complicated. Maybe it was the beginning of understanding. The next morning, I walked the 5 miles to Dachau. I needed to see what I'd refused to see. May 16th, 1945, 5:43 a.m. The road to Dachau. My boots crunched on gravel as the sun broke over the tree line. I'd left before Papa woke, before the girls stirred, before I could change my mind. A note on the table. Gone to market, back by noon. It was a lie. There was no market. There hadn't been a real market in months. Just desperate people trading wedding rings for turnips, family heirlooms for moldy bread. I was walking to Dachau. The road was empty, except for ghosts. Every 100 yards, I passed evidence of collapse. An abandoned Wehrmacht truck, its tires stripped. A charred farmhouse, walls still standing, but windows blown out like empty eye sockets. Shell casings glinting in the dirt. And the smell. Even 5 miles away, even 2 weeks after liberation, the smell reached me on the wind when it shifted east. Sweet and putrid and wrong. The smell of death on an industrial scale. My stomach churned, but I kept walking. If I came back from this war with more hate than I left with, then Hitler won. Corporal Washington's words echoed in my head. He'd chosen to see me, a German woman, a citizen of the country that had tried to exterminate entire peoples, as human, as worthy of kindness. The least I could do was choose to see the truth. 6:47 a.m. Dachau main gate. The iron gate stood open. Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. Mocked from above in twisted metal letters. The lie that had greeted prisoners for 12 years. American soldiers guarded the entrance now. MPs from the 42nd Infantry Division. Armbands crisp, faces hard. One held up a hand as I approached. "No Germans?" he said in accented but clear German. "Camp is closed to civilians. I need to see," I said. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Hollow. "I lived 5 miles from here, for 10 years. I need to see I couldn't finish the sentence. The soldier studied me. He was young, maybe 23, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. His name tape read, Sullivan. "Lady," he said quietly, "you don't want to see this. Trust me. Go home." "I can't." The words came out firmer than I felt. "Not until I see." He exchanged glances with his partner, an older man with sergeant stripes and eyes that had seen too much. The sergeant sighed. "Let her in, Sullivan. She wants to carry this weight. Let her carry it." They stepped aside. I walked through the gate and entered hell, the courtyard. 7:02 a.m. The first thing I saw was prisoners, survivors, living skeletons in striped uniforms that hung off frames that shouldn't have been able to stand. Some sat in the sun, faces turned upward like flowers seeking light. Others shuffled between buildings, moving with the careful deliberation of the very old or very sick. One man looked at me. His eyes were sunken, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, but in his gaze was something worse than hatred. Recognition. He knew what I was. German, civilian, someone who'd lived in comfort 5 miles away while he and thousands of others had been worked, starved, and murdered. I wanted to say something. Apologize. Explain that I didn't know, but the words died in my throat because they were lies, weren't they? Maybe I didn't know the full extent. Maybe I'd never seen inside these walls, but I'd known something. We'd all known something. The trains that passed through our village at night, packed with people, the rumors whispered in church, the neighbors who disappeared and were never mentioned again, the teacher who stopped coming to school after she asked too many questions. We'd known enough to be complicit. The man turned away from me. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't spit. He just turned away. And somehow that was worse than any condemnation. I kept walking. The barracks. 7:34 a.m. An American medic, a captain with a red cross on his helmet, was distributing soup to a line of survivors. Real soup. Thick with vegetables and meat. But the men could only take small portions. Their stomachs, the captain explained to a nurse, couldn't handle real food yet. Too much would kill them. They'd been starved so systematically that feeding them required medical supervision. I watched a man, maybe 40, maybe 70, impossible to tell, receive his cup of broth with shaking hands. He held it to his face and breathed in the steam before sipping. Tears ran down his cheeks. "How long were you here?" I heard the nurse ask in halting German. 6 years, the man whispered. "Since 1939, Sachsenhausen first, then here. 6 years in this place. 6 years of watching friends die, of clinging to life by fingernails, of surviving when thousands around you didn't. And I'd been 5 miles away, complaining about butter rations. The nurse, an American woman in her 30s with kind eyes, noticed me standing there. "Are you with the Red Cross?" she asked. I shook my head. I lived nearby. I came to see." Her expression changed. Not quite hostility, but a coldness crept in. "Well," she said, turning back to her patient. "Now you've seen. I had seen. But not enough. Not yet." The crematorium. 8:11 a.m. A German-speaking American lieutenant was documenting everything with a camera. An official record, he explained when I asked, for the war crimes trials that would come. Evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. "You want to see the worst of it?" he asked. Not cruel, just matter of fact. "I'll show you." He led me to a low brick building. The ovens. They'd run out of fuel in the final weeks, the lieutenant explained. Bodies had piled up. The SS guards had tried to burn the evidence but couldn't keep up. When the Americans arrived on April 29th, there were nearly 2,000 corpses stacked like cordwood. Most had been buried in mass graves now. But the ovens remained. I looked into one of them. Saw the ash. The bone fragments that hadn't burned completely, the metal gurneys where bodies had been loaded, human beings, reduced to ash and bone. Efficient, some cold part of my brain observed. They made it efficient. That thought made me vomit, right there, in front of the ovens, in front of the American lieutenant who watched with neither pity nor judgment. When I finished, he handed me a canteen of water. "First time?" he asked. I nodded, wiping my mouth. "It never gets easier," he said. "I've been documenting camps for 3 weeks. Dachau, Buchenwald, Nordhausen. Every time it's like seeing it for the first time." He paused. "But we keep looking. Because if we don't look, if we don't document, someone will say it never happened. That we made it up. Propaganda." He was right. Years later, I would hear people, Germans, people I knew, claim the camps were exaggerated, Allied lies, that it couldn't have been that bad. But I had seen the ovens. I had smelled the death. I had looked into the eyes of survivors. It had been exactly that bad. Worse. The rail spur. 9:23 a.m. The trains had stopped running, but the tracks remained. A boxcar sat abandoned on a side rail, door open. Straw covered the floor. Bloodstains darkened the wood. A sign, newly posted by American authorities, explained in English and German. Prisoners had been transported in these cars, up to 100 per car designed for 40, without food or water, sometimes for days. Many died in transit. I climbed into the car, stood in the space where human beings had been packed so tight they couldn't sit down, where people had suffocated, died of thirst, went mad from the darkness, and the pressure, and the certainty of what waited at the journey's end. And I thought about Corporal Washington, a black man from Georgia, from a country that had its own boxcars, its own systems of oppression, lynchings, segregation, laws that said he couldn't eat at the same lunch counter as a white man. He'd fought to liberate these camps. He'd risked his life to free people his own country would have discriminated against back home, and then he'd shared his rations with me. The complexity of it made my head spin. The world wasn't simple, wasn't clean. The liberators had their own sins. The victims weren't all innocent. The guilty weren't all monsters. But some things were clear. This place was evil. What had been done here was evil. And I had lived 5 miles away and done nothing. That was a fact I would carry for the rest of my life. 10:47 a.m., walking home. I left Dachau as noon approached. The walk back took longer. My legs felt heavy, my body exhausted despite having done nothing but walk and witness. Witness. Such a small word for such a crushing weight. The landscape looked different now. The same trees, same fields, same farmhouses, but I saw it differently. Every kilometer between my farm and that camp was a kilometer I'd traveled in willful ignorance. Every day I'd milked cows and baked bread and kissed my daughters goodnight. People were dying within walking distance. Near the village, I passed Frau Muller hanging laundry. She waved. "Greta, where have you been? You look terrible." "Dachau," I said simply. "I went to Dachau." Her face changed. The smile died. She turned back to her laundry without another word, hands moving faster, more agitated. We'd all made the same choice. Don't look. Don't ask. Don't know. But now I couldn't unknow. May 20th, 1945. 4 days later. Papa found me in the barn, crying into my hands, surrounded by hay and chickens and the normalcy of farm life that felt like a mockery. "You went to the camp," he said. Not a question. "Yes." He sat down heavily on a feed barrel. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, I knew Greta. Not everything, but more than I admitted. My head snapped up. "What?" "The smoke," he said quietly. "In the early years, 40, 41, you could smell it sometimes when the wind was right. Sweet, wrong. And I knew what it meant because I'm not an idiot." His hands shook. "But what could I do? Speak up and join them? Get you and the girls killed? So you did nothing." "So I did nothing." He looked at me with eyes full of shame. "And I taught you to do nothing. To look away. To survive. Friedrich was a good man who believed bad things." Papa interrupted. "He thought he was defending the fatherland. He didn't know, or didn't let himself know, what the fatherland had become." We sat in silence. Outside, Anna and Ilse were playing, their laughter carrying through the barn walls. Innocent. For now. What do we do now? I finally asked. Papa stood slowly, joints creaking. We make sure they know. Make sure Ilse and Anna grow up knowing what happened. Not the propaganda. Not the excuses. The truth. They'll ask why we didn't stop it. Yes. He headed toward the barn door, then paused. And we'll tell them the truth, because we were cowards, and we'll teach them to be braver than we were. June 3rd, 1945. A package arrived at the village postal station. For me, from an APO address. American military mail. Inside, a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed Corporal Washington and his squad, posed in front of their Sherman tank somewhere in France. 8 men, all black, all grinning despite the mud and exhaustion. On the back, someone had written, 761st Tank Battalion, come out fighting, France, February 1945. The letter was from Private Davis, Frau Hoffmann. Corporal Washington asked me to write because his handwriting is terrible and mine is only slightly better. We're in Munich now, helping with reconstruction. Everything's a mess, but slowly getting better. The corporal wanted you to have this photo. He said to tell you that we all come from somewhere. We all have histories. His grandmother's parents were slaves. Mine too. We fought for a country that still makes us sit in the back of the bus. But we also fought because we knew what the other option looked like. We saw it at Dachau. We saw what happens when hate becomes policy. The corporal says you walked to the camp. That took guts. Most people don't want to look. They want to pretend it never happened or that they didn't know. Maybe you didn't know everything, but you looked when you could have kept your eyes closed. That matters. Tell your girls about the camps. Tell them about what happened, but also tell them about the people who chose kindness, even when they had every reason not to. Tell them about the corporal's grandmother. Healed people heal people. That's how we make sure this never happens again. Pivot Samuel Davis. I kept that letter, kept the photograph. Years later, when Ilse was studying history in university and Anna was teaching in Berlin, I gave them these items along with my diary from the war years. This is your inheritance, I told them. Not money, not property, the truth. August 1947. 2 years later, Germany was still in ruins, but we were rebuilding. The American occupation had been harsh but fair. Food was still scarce but improving. We'd planted American seeds and harvested real vegetables. Slowly, impossibly, life was returning. I received one more letter from Corporal Washington. He was back in Georgia, working at a garage, saving money to maybe start his own business someday. The letter was brief but warm. Frau Hoffmann, they told us we were fighting for freedom. Funny thing is, we came home and still can't drink from the same water fountains as white folks in Georgia. Still can't vote in my county, but I don't regret it, because I saw what the alternative looked like. I saw Dachau. You asked me once why we helped you. Here's the real answer. Because every act of kindness is an act of resistance against the hate that put those camps there in the first place. When you plant those American seeds, remember, gardens grow slow. Peace grows slower, but they both grow if you tend them. Keep tending your garden, Frau Hoffmann. James Washington. I never saw Corporal Washington again. Never heard from Private Davis after that one package, but I thought about them often. Wondered if they faced more kindness or more hatred when they returned home. Hoped that America had learned something from the war, though I suspected, correctly, that change would come slow and hard. 1967. 22 years later, Ilse brought home an American newspaper. She'd been studying in Frankfurt, working with an international education program. The headline showed Black Americans marching, protesting, demanding the rights they'd been promised, but never given. "Mama," she said, "look at this name. There, in a photograph of civil rights demonstrators in Atlanta, Georgia, was a face I recognized even after 22 years. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. Corporal James Washington, now just James Washington, marching for voting rights, still fighting, still choosing to heal rather than hate." I clipped that photograph and placed it in my diary next to his letter and the photo from 1945. Some people spend their whole lives trying to tear the world down. Others spend their whole lives trying to build it back up. I'd seen both kinds up close. 1982. 37 years later, Anna asked me to speak at her school. The students were learning about the Holocaust, and she wanted them to hear from someone who'd been there. Not in the camps, I would never claim that experience, but nearby, complicit through silence. I was 69 years old. Papa had died in 1963. Friedrich was a photograph on the mantel and a gravestone in Russia. Ilse had 2 children of her own. Anna taught history in Munich. And I stood in front of 30 German teenagers and told them the truth. I told them about the smoke I'd ignored, the trains I'd heard in the night, the neighbors who disappeared, the convenient blindness we'd all practiced. I told them about the day the Americans came, about black soldiers who'd shared their rations with the enemy's civilians, about Corporal Washington and his grandmother's wisdom, and I told them about my walk to Dachau. I thought seeing it would give me closure, I said. It didn't. You don't get closure from something like that. You get responsibility. The responsibility to remember, to witness, to make sure it never happens again. A student raised her hand. Frau Hoffmann, do you think people today would act differently if it happened again? I was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know. I hope so. But hope isn't enough. You have to choose. Every day. Kindness or cruelty. Speaking up or staying silent. Looking or turning away. How do you live with it? Another student asked. The guilt? You don't live with it, I said honestly. You live through it. You acknowledge it. You do better. And you teach the next generation to do better than you did. I showed them the photograph of the 761st Tank Battalion. Told them about men who fought for a country that discriminated against them. Who liberated camps while facing oppression at home. Who chose kindness when they had every reason to choose vengeance. These men taught me something, I said. They taught me that humanity isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to be better than our worst impulses. It's about tending the garden even when the soil is poisoned. 1989, 44 years later. The Berlin Wall fell. I watched it on television with Ilse and Anna and my 4 grandchildren. Impossible. Unthinkable. The Germany that had been divided by the war I'd lived through was reuniting. One of my grandsons, Thomas, 16, sharp as a whip, turned to me. Oma, do you think Corporal Washington is still alive? Could we find him? I'd wondered the same thing for decades. Whether he was still in Georgia, whether he'd lived to see the Civil Rights Act pass in 1964, whether he'd seen Martin Luther King's dream of a more just America. Anna, resourceful as always, spent 3 weeks making inquiries through international education channels, military archives, civil rights organizations. She found him. James Washington, now 74 years old, living in Atlanta, Georgia, owned a successful garage, had been active in the civil rights movement, had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, was willing to speak with me. The phone call was arranged through Anna's university. International calls were expensive and complicated in 1989, but we managed. I sat in Anna's Munich apartment on a cold November evening, phone receiver pressed to my ear, heart pounding. Frau Hoffmann? The voice was older, rougher, but still warm. This James Washington, from the 761st. Corporal Washington, I breathed. I never thought I'd... Just James now, he said with a laugh. Been a long time since anyone called me Corporal. You doing all right? Your daughter said you wanted to talk? We spoke for an hour. He told me about his life after the war. The struggles, the victories, the long, slow progress of civil rights, the disappointments and the triumphs. I told him about raising Ilse and Anna, about teaching them the truth, about walking to Dachau, about the garden that had grown from those American seeds he'd brought 44 years ago. You remember what you told me? I asked. About your grandmother? Healed people heal people? I remember. You were right. It took me a long time to understand what that meant. But you were right. There was a pause on the line. Then, Frau Hoffmann, Greta. I'm glad you called. I've thought about you over the years. Wondered if you made it through all right. If your girls grew up okay. They did. Because of you. Because you showed me what it meant to choose humanity over hate. We all made choices, he said quietly. Some of us chose better than others, but you chose to look, to face it. That's not nothing. We promised to write. to stay in touch. Two old souls who'd been briefly connected during the worst time in history, now finding connection again in a world that was slowly, painfully, learning to be better. 1995, 50 years later. The 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. Commemorations across Germany. Memorials. Speeches. Survivors sharing their stories while they still could. I returned to Dachau for the first time in 50 years. The camp was now a memorial site, preserved as a testament and a warning. Thousands of visitors walked through the gates each year, learning what had been done there. I stood at the crematorium ovens, now behind glass, protected, documented. A placard explained in multiple languages what this place had been used for. An elderly man stood beside me. Late 70s, maybe 80. A yellow star pinned to his jacket. One of the survivors who wore them now as a badge of honor and remembrance. "You were here?" he asked in German. "During the war, 5 miles away," I admitted. I lived 5 miles away. I waited for his anger, his condemnation, what I'd received from that survivor in 1945, the turning away, the silent judgment. Instead, he nodded slowly. "And now you're here, looking, remembering." "I came once before," I said. "In May 45, right after liberation. Then you saw it at its worst." He was quiet for a moment. "Most Germans waited decades. Some never came at all. You came when the bodies were still warm. I should have come earlier. Years earlier. Should have. He interrupted gently. "Is a luxury we can't afford. You came when you could. You faced it. That's more than most." We stood in silence, two old people carrying different weights of the same history. "There were American soldiers," I said. "Black soldiers. They helped me, helped my family. I didn't understand it then. Why they would show us kindness. Why would they?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe because kindness is the only thing that breaks the cycle. Hate just breeds more hate. A man told me once, 'Healed people heal people.' Smart man. He was," I said. "He really was." April 28, 2000. 55 years later. James Washington died on April 28, 2000. 55 years to the day after he'd first knocked on my farmhouse door. The obituary arrived via email, forwarded by his daughter, who I'd been corresponding with since our phone call in 1989. James Washington, 84, of Atlanta, Georgia, passed peacefully surrounded by family. A veteran of World War II, civil rights activist and community leader, he is remembered for his unwavering commitment to justice and his belief that healed people heal people. He is survived by... I sat in my kitchen, a different kitchen, in a different house, in a different Germany, and cried for the second time since the war ended. The first had been in 1945, reading his letter. The second was now, reading his obituary. He'd lived a full life, had fought 2 wars, one against fascism in Europe, one against racism in America, had won some battles and lost others, had built a business, raised a family, helped change a country, and 55 years ago, he'd chosen to share his rations with a German farm woman and her daughters. That choice had changed everything for me. June 2005. 60 years later. My last public appearance. The 60th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau. I was 92, frail but clear-minded. Anna pushed my wheelchair to the memorial site where survivors, liberators, and descendants gathered to remember. They asked me to speak. Just a few words. A testimony from someone who'd been there, in that gray area between perpetrator and victim. A civilian who'd known and not known, who'd been guilty of silence but had chosen to face the truth. I spoke for 5 minutes, told the assembled crowd about the American soldiers who'd shown me what humanity looked like, about the walk I should have taken years earlier, about the responsibility of memory, and I ended with this. I learned 3 things from the war. First, evil requires our silence to flourish. Second, guilt and responsibility are different things. You can be guilty of the past, but you're responsible for the future. And third, the only thing that breaks the cycle of hatred is choosing every day to heal instead of hurt. I held up the photograph of the 761st Tank Battalion, laminated now, preserved. 8 black soldiers who'd fought to free Europe while America still oppressed them at home. "These men taught me that," I said, "and I've spent 60 years trying to live up to their example." The crowd was silent. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined. Not for me, never for me, but for the message, for the possibility of change, for the idea that even those who'd been complicit could learn, could grow, could do better, for the hope that healed people really could heal people. 2010. 65 years later. I died on October 12, 2010 at the age of 97, peacefully, in my sleep, surrounded by my daughters, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They found my diary when they cleaned out my apartment. All 68 years of it, from 1942 to 2010. Every entry preserved, documented, brutally honest. Anna had it published. Not the whole thing. Some things are too private, too painful. But excerpts. Enough to tell the story. Enough to show what it was like to be a German civilian during the war and after. The complicity, the ignorance, the awakening, the lifelong work of atonement. The book was titled 5 Miles from Dachau, A German Farm Woman's Reckoning. It sold modestly, was used in some schools, generated controversy. Some people said I didn't have the right to tell this story, that I was centering myself in a narrative about Jewish suffering. They weren't entirely wrong, but others said, this is exactly the story that needs to be told. The story of how ordinary people enable extraordinary evil, how silence is complicity, how it's never too late to face the truth, even if you can't undo the past. The dedication read, for Corporal James Washington, 1921 to 2000, and the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, who taught me that healed people heal people, and for all those who died at Dachau, who deserved so much better from us. Epilogue, 2020, 75 years later. My great-granddaughter Sophie now teaches history in Berlin. She's 32. Brilliant, fierce in her commitment to truth and justice. She contacted James Washington's granddaughter through ancestry websites and historical societies. They met in Atlanta in February 2020, just before the pandemic shut down the world. Together, they visited the Georgia garage James Washington had built, still operating, now run by his grandson. They stood in the workshop where he'd spent his post-war years building something instead of destroying something. Sophie sent me, or rather, sent Anna since I was gone, a photo. 2 women, 1 black, 1 white, 1 American, 1 German, standing together in front of James Washington's garage. Both wearing masks because a new kind of threat was sweeping the world. Both smiling despite everything. On the back, Sophie had written, Oma Greta was right. Gardens grow slow. Peace grows slower. But they both grow if you tend them. We're still tending. Still growing. Still learning from Corporal Washington and his grandmother. Healed people heal people. I didn't live to see that moment, but I'd lived long enough to know it was coming. Long enough to see my daughters raise their children with the truth. Long enough to see Germany reckon. Imperfectly. Incompletely. But genuinely. With its past. Long enough to see that the choice to face the truth, no matter how late, no matter how painful, is always worth making. Because the alternative is to let hate win. And I'd learned from Corporal James Washington that we can't let hate win. Not ever. Not even when it's easier. Not even when it costs us everything. The garden grows if you tend it. I spent 65 years tending that garden. It's your turn now. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think about the choices we all make every day, subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. But most importantly, leave a comment. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you'll do differently. Tell me how you'll tend the garden in your corner of the world. Because these stories aren't just history. They're warnings. They're lessons. They're roadmaps for how to be better than we were. Share this video. Show it to someone who needs to hear it. Especially now, when hate is loud and organized, when it's easy to turn away, when silence feels safer than speaking up. Remember, healed people heal people. But first, you have to choose to heal. What choice will you make today? This story is based on historical events and real units, including the 761st Tank Battalion and the liberation of Dachau on April 29, 1945. While Greta Hoffmann and James Washington are fictional characters, their experiences reflect documented realities of German civilians and Black American soldiers during and after World War II.